Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about season 4, episode 8, I believe, Little Green Men. Before we continue, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
Absolutely. And as I say, every single week you should find us and follow us because we are a good time. We are great. Um, and it's not necessarily, boasting or a humble brag or whatever, but really enjoy this show. We really enjoy talking about Deep Space Nine and kind of enlightening people to the things that you might have forgotten or have glossed over in the intervening years since the show was on the air. And I think it's just, a great, you know, pastime to have to listen to at some point or another. So yeah, I really enjoy it, and I hope you do too. And if you do find us and follow us, drop us a line. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, or just that you're listening. And we would definitely like to hear from you, and might even give you a shout out or two at some point or another. Who knows?
Yeah.
Still not over the contest thing, so I'm still a little petty right now. So that might be a while down the road. Anyway,
Come on,
anyway,
somebody, please,
I know you
anybody.
listeners are out there. Yes, I know you're out there. Um,
put in your put in the submission. I mean, even if you're the only person, it'd be fun to have at least one.
we see you pop up on the thing, but whatever. Anyway, as David said, we are here to talk about Little Green Men. Interesting episode. Now, I say that a lot, but in this case, what I will say, and we're going to get into why, but this is my move along home. So,
Really? Ah,
yes.
okay. All
And we're
right.
going to
I'll
get
have to
into
hear why.
why.
But okay, yeah.
So just keep that in mind. And for those of you who don't know, David, when he first watched Move Along Home, did not enjoy it, as many people did not enjoy Move Along Home. And over the years, I have found things to enjoy about that episode. But this is not that for me. This is definitely my, if I can skip it, I will skip it. In fact, it's been a
Interesting.
long time since I had watched it, so I had to go back and watch it for tonight. And yeah, definitely picked up on all the reasons that I don't like this episode. So
Okay.
yes,
Should I
we're definitely gonna
recap
get
it
into
then
that.
so you can avoid it as
I
much
was
as
gonna
possible?
say, I'll let you recap this one, of course, but before
Fairly
we do
simple
that,
recap, so I feel like I
uh,
can do it pretty easily.
all right. Well, you want to just jump right in tonight and go
Let's
for it?
do it. Let's go
All
for
right,
it. All right, guys. So
recap
again,
it.
this is Little Green Men. This one is focused heavily on Quark, Rom, and Nog. So we can say that right out the get go. So we start off on the station, and Rom is hosting a kind of going away party for Nog, his son, who has been enrolled is about to be enrolled in Starfleet Academy. Apparently, a part of this ritual is that all of the things that the Ferengi child has had as a child, as he goes into adulthood, he sells as he goes into adulthood, which is a fun little moment because everyone on the station is invited to come bid on Nog's things. Rom takes his son's pajamas, and Worf takes his tooth sharpener. Of all things, so that gets things going, and Quark shows up to grab Rom from this ritual, basically,
Hmm.
because he has just received a shuttle from his cousin Gala, the one who owns a moon and who
Hmm.
got that moon in part because he got uh, a loan from Quark. So anyway, he's finally got the shuttle he's been promised all this time, and he imagines that it's a piece of junk. So he needs Rom to go inspect it, and Rom inspects it and says, "Hey, it's actually great. It's in great condition. There's nothing wrong with it. We could take it wherever we want." And Quark decides, "Well, great. Then why don't we take Nog to Earth, for his trip to Starfleet Academy?" But of course, Quark is going to make a illicit uh, smuggle some things to Earth. In this case, some volatile chemosite.
Hmm.
So on the trip to Earth, Nog is learning about Earth from a gift from O'Brien and Dr. Bashir that explains all of Earth customs and history. But as they're traveling and they're trying to come out of warp, Nog realizes that something's wrong with the warp engine. It won't drop out of warp, which they presume is maybe why they got this ship from Cousin Gala. Maybe it was a attempt to sabotage them. So the only way they can get out of warp is for Nog to use the volatile chemosite as part of the de-warp process, and they do that, but unfortunately, it also causes them to go back in time to July 1947 and crash land near Roswell, New Mexico, which is insinuated throughout the rest of the episode is the uh, true history of the Roswell incident, which we'll get into a little bit more, the Roswell UFO incident. And Cork, being the genius salesman that he is, realizes that, oh, these primitive humans with their warfare and all that nonsense would be very easy to manipulate. He can change Earth's history into his own favor, introducing illicit technologies and futuristic technologies to the 1947 American military and threatened to go to the Russians instead if they won't give him what he wants. There is a brief time where their language translators won't work, and so Rom has to get them working again. But once Quark can communicate, he basically says, "I want to. I've been sent here on a mission to begin trade with your planet." And of course, the general in charge of keeping this whole thing hush hush doesn't believe him, and so he sends one of his underlings to go basically torture, or at least use some truth serum to try and get Quark to confess who he really is and what his real plans are. And Nog, knowing the history of Earth, pretends that they're actually uh, on some illicit mission to get them to basically obey them. Hey, what you don't do, we say we're going to unleash our military on you. Um, Fortunately for our three Ferengi, Odo, knowing that Quark is the devious smuggler that he is, hitched a
Right.
ride, and he's been there the whole time, and he's been running around as a dog, and he has fixed the ship, and he tells the Ferengi, "Hey, if you guys we need to escape. We need to get out of here." And so they manage to, with the help of some humans, a nurse and a professor couple, they helped our Ferengi escape. They get back on the ship. They take the ship and quickly go to a nuclear testing site, which they use that to help restart the warp engine. And using the remaining amount of chemosite, they're able to warp back to the future. And so Nog goes to Starfleet Academy. The others return back to the station. Quark has to sell off the damaged spacecraft for parts, and Odo arrests Quark for smuggling contraband. So yeah, that's the overarching plot of the episode. Anything I
Yep.
missed?
Nope. And again, that's just like we do. We like to hit the highlights, and then we're going to get into the more specific things here and break it down for you. So pretty good. You're all right. Um, we can take it from there, of course.
Gotcha.
So I like to ask you always, because obviously I've seen all these episodes 1,001 times, and this is your first time watching. What
Right.
was your overall impression of this episode? What did you think?
I would say that it's a fun little episode in the sense that we get to focus mainly on the Ferengi, especially all three of our Ferengi. This is the most time all three of them have ever spent on screen together. Um,
Hmm.
we've had the episode of them going to the Ferengi homeworld, but Nog wasn't along for that part of it. Um, However, I do feel that this is another episode that suffers because of the limited time they had to tell their story. Unfortunately, it's fairly basic. Aliens show up, they get captured by the U.S. military. Like the worst scene in the whole episode is when the humans, the professor, the nurse, and three of the army guys just walk into the room with the Ferengi and start trying to communicate. And they start banging on their heads because Nog and is trying to fix the translator, which are apparently in their ears somewhere, and so they're kind of trying to bang the universal translators. Um, so it's kind of a weird scene because it's like I would think, like, let me put it this way: in movies where we treat the there's new alien life, new alien life. Those scenes are very carefully approached. People put on suits, and there's lots of music, and there's a very
Mhm.
serious tone. In this one, they just walk in, and they try and communicate, and it just felt kind of basic. It felt like,
So
yeah. Go
there's
ahead. Yeah,
actually
yeah.
a reason. There's actually a reason for that. This episode was supposed to be kind of homage, tribute to the early '50s B movies that they used to do that were kind of the monster of the week movie.
Oh,
And
okay.
in a lot of those movies, there wasn't a lot of attention to detail to things like that you're talking about, heavily
Right.
costumed suits and theatrical moments or whatever. It was a lot of leaps and bounds needing to be made in order to get you to the main conflict that was being
Right.
featured in that particular movie. Again, costuming, props, things like that weren't weren't the best, and I mean, you could blame that on just the way that things were done back then. Because again, TV was still a relatively new media, and having
Right.
this kind of weekly entertainment in homes was still they were still winging a lot of things.
Right.
But sci-fi monster of the week, monster of the month movies were quite popular. But this was always kind of their classic setup. The aliens crash land. We don't know how to speak to them or communicate with them until someone makes a random breakthrough, and in this they kind of turned that on its ear a little bit. That instead of it being the human that made the breakthrough for communication, it was our aliens doing it. They fixed their technology in order to communicate with primitive man. And
Right.
then also kind of laying heavily on the tropes of early science fiction, where the message from the aliens is basically a lecture on the human condition in some way. Quark outraged to find out that humans were conducting atom bomb tests on our own planet,
Yeah.
and
I was
also that
gonna.
we
Yeah.
buy poisons and smoke cigarettes and
Yes.
all this stuff. And so there was a lot of that, and it was an attempt basically to kind of wink and a nod to those old movies, showing kind of the history of sci-fi, right? Because without those things from way back then, we certainly wouldn't have what we have in the '90s or beyond, if
Right.
they hadn't kind of proven their point there a little bit. But also kind of poking fun at the fact that a lot of that stuff was very campy, very hokey, and this is supposed to be a fun episode. In fact, they didn't think they were going to be able to do it. This episode had been pitched over and over and over again throughout the other seasons, and they just didn't feel like they could find the right tone for it to work until the fourth season.
Okay.
And so that's
Well,
when
there's certainly
that's
a
when we get it.
reason for it to happen this time with Nog
Yeah,
going to Starfleet. Yeah.
right. We now had a reason. We had enough character development from all of them, Rom, Nog, Quark, to make this make a bit more sense.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it makes sense that it would have come up now, and then them trying to inject humor into it. And it does turn out to be a bit more of a lighthearted episode, despite its many, many flaws. So um
I feel like I
yeah.
should go ahead and ask you. Like, do we want to move on to your why you don't
Uh
like it, or should we wait a little bit longer?
I mean, I don't care. We can do it. I'll kind of dole them out as we go through. But I will suffice to say, one of the first things that annoys the crap out of me about this episode is the smoking. Everybody is smoking, and I get it. I understand that they were doing it because, again, back in the '50s and at the time when what there's that they're kind of doing the setting and everything, that was always done in the movies to denote seriousness. This is a stressful, tense situation. That's how you knew the character was serious, how you knew
Right.
they were a no nonsense, by the book kind of individual, was that they would smoke a cigarette or smoke a cigar or whatever it was. But
Right.
in
And then when they
this
talk, they
episode,
gesture very, very
gesture a
openly.
lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of deep breathing and deep sighing and the smoke trails and all of that. That was a big deal. And they did that ad nauseum here. Like everyone is smoking, even to the point where at one point the scientist doctor lights two cigarettes at the same
Yes.
time, for
Yes.
one for himself and one for his fiance. and
Yeah.
it annoyed me so much. And I was just like, because, and again, I've watched a lot of that very old retro sci-fi, and I do understand why they were doing it. But even then, like, to do a comparison, this was quite heavy-handed, and I get that that's probably because they were trying to make a point here with what they were doing. But it really annoyed me, and it stopped me from being able to like really enjoy other aspects of the show
So,
because it was
to be
just
very clear, you're annoyed that they were just doing it so much.
yes, yes, it was just such a obvious nod to the 40s and 50s that I was just like, I can't stand like do other things to make me think that it's in that time frame, not just rely so much on a heavy-handed prop that was used.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that one just because it's like the first thing you notice. Everyone is smoking. Everyone. Even the general, when he rolls up, he's got
He's got
that
that big old
thick
cigar,
cigar
and
tucked away in his jaw.
he's
Right.
always biting on it. Yeah, you're right. He's gnawing on it
Biting on it
hardcore.
intensely, and it never goes out. Like if you notice, he's smoking it like every time we see him, he's got that damn cigar in his mouth. It never goes out. Does he
You
ever
know,
finish it? I don't know. It's just it's there. It's always there.
Barry, you're
Bothered
making
me.
me mad because I remember him doing all that, and now if I ever watch this episode ever again, that's all I'll be thinking about is the
Hey,
cigar.
I'm
I
sorry.
was able
That's all I could see was just, and it's like, and he's got it tight in there, like it fits perfectly. Like clearly,
the actor. He does some. He loves
I was gonna
cigars
say,
just
I
as
wouldn't be
much.
surprised at all if that actor probably really does enjoy a good cigar because I mean, it was just like the perfect spot for it,
Yes, his mouth had
in
like
his
formed
mouth,
around the
strategically
cigar.
formed. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I was just like, Jesus Christ. And again, it never goes out. It never really seems to diminish. At one point it did look a little bit smaller, but then like the very next scene, big cigar again. So I was
Yeah.
just like, he's got the magic cigar of the 40s in his mouth, and it was awful. I just didn't like it. Didn't like
Right.
it. What else didn't I like? Oh, the overly optimistic, supremely naive woman officer,
The
right?
nurse. Yeah.
She's there, and she is, and because of her fiance, who is the, I guess, the brains of the outfit, gets invited in to converse with our aliens. But everything she says is just so wide-eyed and moony, and even at one point, even her own fiance calls her. He's like, "Oh, ever the dreamer." And
Yeah.
it's just like it's that overly contrived language that again was featured in the 40s and 50s in that early stuff,
You're
but it's just
right.
like, guys,
As
come
you say
on.
this, you're right because they become like they're the that's the reason this episode almost doesn't. That's why it doesn't have enough content from the Ferengi groups angle. It's because you're right. They turn into the
The
protagonists. They have whole
Yeah,
scenes to themselves.
and it's
That
just
whole like
them, and it's like, and it's always the constant close up of the two of them together, and
yes.
she's just looking at him with such abject adoration, and he's doing
Well,
that
and he does the
classic
same to
50s.
her. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but he also does that classic 50s stare off into the distance, while she's like over
Yeah.
here in silhouette talking. And I couldn't stand it. And then there's, the scene at the end where they
Yeah. I was gonna say
help the aliens leave when they're back in the Jeep, and they're just so in love with each other, and they
yes,
have to
and
have
they
their
kiss,
passionate
and it was
kiss
like
as the ship is warping out over their head. And I was
yeah.
just like, oh my God. And then
You're
that, and
totally
then
right,
there's
Perry.
yeah,
You're
and then
totally
there's
right.
the scene where earlier, where they're together, and again, it's that cigarette scene where he's lighting both cigarettes, and she's
Right.
talking about one day, who knows, we'll be able to travel to the stars and faster than like this and everything, and he's like,
It'll be a
gee golly,
federation.
but
Yeah.
he's like,
Oh,
gee
and then he
golly, all I can think about, you're talking about all this great stuff, and we got these aliens, but all I can think about is how pretty
you
you're
in
gonna
that wedding
look in your
dress.
wedding dress.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just I the I couldn't roll my eyes hard
Perry, the more
enough.
you talk about it, like for some reason I was able to just kind of just go for it. But yeah, I can
Ugh,
see where if you're in the wrong mood one day and you're watching this episode and you'd be like, why is this happening?
yes,
And then it would just grind
yes,
you from then on. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that kiss at the end. I remember seeing that and being like, dang, that's like a full 10 seconds. Like they're
Right,
doing the
it's like
full on.
overly long, right? And they're just, and the heads are moving, they're
Well, and
mushing their
I just remember
faces in.
thinking,
Oh.
like, you guys just punched a general in the face. Like, you guys are so dead. Like, what are you doing?
right.
Like you're having a way
You
too
you
much self-indulge in this moment.
And
But
that was also always the case in those 50s movies. People would disobey orders and would assault other officers or people or whatever, and there was seemingly no repercussions ever for anything. And I mean, that's kind of some of the stuff that we've moved away from in sci-fi and in Trek in general. You know, if you do some of those things, you better have a pretty good reason for doing it, and you're still going to face some kind of reprimand. But typically, there's other mitigating circumstances which kind of make what you did okay, like
right.
we're gonna give you a pass this time. But yeah, it's just like nope, none of that for these guys. They're gonna sail off and they're gonna get married, and and that's it. That's
Yeah.
the end. um yeah, I just all of that stuff I really didn't enjoy the way that they wanted us to enjoy it. And I never did. This isn't a case of, oh, I watched it the first time and I loved it and thought it was cute and funny and whatever else. And now over the years of watching it multiple times, no, I distinctly remember when I watched this episode being upset that this was the episode that I got this week.
Huh.
Following Starship down to this was just, not for me. I never enjoyed it. And yeah, watched it again to discover I still
Right.
don't enjoy it. And there are
You know,
more things that we're going to talk about.
if I were to fix this episode based on all that, I would say that because my main critique has been that basically the Ferengi angle has been, it was just minimal. Like Quark
Mhm.
promises to give. Let me put it this way: Quark promises all this great technology and has no way of bringing about any of that. His ship is damaged. He's not connected to the future. How is he going to create, you know, replicators? How is he going to do anything that he promises? He might know about it, but I don't trust that Quark or Nog or Rom can reproduce any of that stuff, certainly with the technology
Mm.
that's available at the time. So I feel like Quark's little ambitious play about I'm going to control Earth society with my future technology makes sense for all of 2 seconds until you realize the ramifications of all that and how do you bring it about. So if they had focused more on trying to make the Quark Ferengi group angle work, and let's say that the translators just don't work the whole time, um, and then so the episode becomes seeing, you know, humanity from the perspective of we can't understand them, but we can. The fun of the episode might have been, knowing what they're trying to say or communicate, because we know we're humans, we understand American military, whatever or not. So we could know what they're trying to communicate to our Ferengi friends, but we can only hear and understand the Ferengi talking to each other. Quark complaining to Nog and all that, and then Odo, like Odo in the background would have been fun. Like Odo
Yeah.
popping up and like the humans miss it. Like that would have been really scary if the humans had realized Odo was there. They'd have freaked out
Yeah.
real bad. But Quark
I
and
think
the
yeah, I
others
think
are
that would
just
have been
Martians.
yeah, I think that would have been way more interesting too is to have like Odo trying to figure out a way to, get them out of there sooner than what we
Right.
see. And I did enjoy the part where, we're hearing the Ferengi language for the first time because, it's the
Yeah.
humans observing them and, we're hearing that through the one-way mirror and everything.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that because I mean, with Star Trek, I mean, that's always been kind of the main, plot device of how we understand everybody is the universal translator, you
Right.
know? And it wasn't really until the show Star Trek Enterprise where we kind of got into the foundations of the universal translator. And so there were a lot of scenes in that show that were about translating alien languages. So you got a lot more of hearing native languages and seeing that process filtered through the communications officer Hoshi Sato, and how we
Interesting.
work it out. But
Right.
before that show, obviously, it was Deep Space Nine, so we didn't really have that. So getting that opportunity to kind of hear what that language sounds like, I found that very interesting, and I appreciated that. But again, yeah, like you said, it was very short lived, and it actually made the episode more interesting. And then once they got to talking basic, whatever you want to call it, English, basic
English. Yeah.
tongue, whatever, it just I was bored. I like almost immediately I didn't care anymore.
Right.
Because I guess the thought of like where we see it from we're hearing Quark speak English, and we know the humans aren't in on what he's saying because they don't understand the language, and listening to him critique humanity and his, also watching his brain work through the ways in which he could take advantage of things, and he's just kind of, laying out these grand plans, and they can't understand any of that. I did like a lot of that. But yeah, then once it gets to that point of they now understand everybody, they lose their edge as aliens. They lose their
Right.
mystery. Even the general says it. He's like, "You may be an alien, but you remind me of my, brother-in-law, who's a
Yeah, the car
crappy
salesman.
car salesman." Which
Yeah.
I I did not. That part I really didn't like, and mainly because that's always been one of the aspects of the Ferengi that I've just never enjoyed. That basically, when we get right down to it, they are kind of the um, crappy versions of humans, right? All the kind of more negative, money hungry, greedy things that we kind of are supposed to be putting down and rising above, they kind of embody.
Right.
And for him to suddenly go from a little bit of fear, a little bit of hesitation, some awe of the aliens, to now he's just equating him with his jerk off brother from Michigan who sells crappy cars.
Yeah.
It, yeah, lost its appeal again
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah. And actually, so how do they explain how the universal translator works in those episodes from Enterprise you mentioned? Because
Yeah, so
it makes sense. It would make sense if the Ferengi, if Quark and them could understand humans because it's a device they have inside their own ears, but that they
mhm,
weren't able to communicate to them because they don't have,
mhm.
they can't
They don't.
like when Quark first introduces himself after the universal translators were working, he just says his name and who he is, and but it's not clear exactly how he is now. I mean, he's just speaking English as far as we can tell,
Right.
and it's like, wait a minute, how does that work? But I mean, you just let it happen in the point of the episode. But so first off, how does that work? But also, I want to say again, I think that could have made a fun part of the episode if our group understood the humans and therefore knew if they were getting in trouble, but they couldn't communicate, and so they could start getting the whole kinds of shenanigans of we know what they're saying, we know what they're afraid of, we know what they think about us, and we can manipulate them, but we can't communicate either, and how that might cause its own shenanigans. But anyway, how do they
Yeah.
explain the universal translator?
So and I think I now see where we're going to come into a problem with this thing. But in Enterprise, basically at the point in Enterprise where the show starts, humans have been working in partnership with Vulcans for a while now to develop our own warp engines and launch ships, right? And so obviously we're supposed to take that into consideration and know that there's been a large exchange of information and technologies, and there's a lot of people who are specializing in linguistics, and there's one person in particular whose name is Hoshi Sato, who is like she's just like a lingual genius, right? She can speak pretty much every language on earth. She teaches at a school in, I think it's Buenos Aires, is where she's based when the show first starts. And she's teaching another group of people to do what she does. And the captain, the soon to be captain of Enterprise, selects her to be on the mission so that she can. Develop what is really a very primitive, rudimentary universal translator, which can handle whatever languages the Vulcans know and whatever languages humanity knows at the time, and to use those plus her own innate ability to understand language to program and expand the programming of that primitive translator with any new race that comes along. And so the first race that they are dealing with are Klingons, and so the again the Vulcans have a very basic Vulcan to Klingon translation matrix, and then she uses that to kind of bridge the gaps with that and so make a human Klingon one, and kind of ties everything in. And then as the show develops and they go on to other subsequent missions, she keeps doing replicating that process. She's able to pick up on the syntax and structure of certain languages and can help feed certain things in, and then based upon common ship designs or whatever. She can kind of pick up on what certain things are, and she's kind of building the database as they're going, so that pretty
Right.
soon she's got a working uh, real time translator that will receive whatever language is being spoken at the time and broadcast it in whatever language is necessary for the rest of them. Or if they can't broadcast it, she is there to interpret whatever the readout is and can then speak what those words are. So then the universal translator over the years and other iterations, like when we see in Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and so forth, the universal translator is built into the communicators that are worn on their chests. And as
Right.
we see here, some species have them implanted in their heads.
Right.
And it basically does the same thing. It whatever language is being spoken at the time, it hears it, interprets it in real time, and broadcasts it for the other person to understand.
Understand. Right.
And so this is why I was saying I think I can see where we're going to have a problem, because their universal translators in this episode are obviously internal and they're broken. And Rom ends up having to reset them in order for them to understand the humans, which in
Right.
turn lets the humans understand them. So there has to be some component of the universal translator that not only receives but also broadcasts.
Right.
So
Which is
that
very
is the part
strange.
that, yeah, that is the part that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, because it would make sense if everybody in your universe has a universal translator, because then if
Right.
it's broadcasting, then you can it can then be received and whatever. But since, as we see here, the humans here don't have universal translators, so
Right.
for it to work, that means that thing must be um, transmitting some kind of signal that they are able to pick up on, or make humans pick up on, to interpret
Right.
whatever is being said by Quark. And so, because we see that Quark doesn't actually speak English, he doesn't speak standard, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
He speaks the Ferengi language, and then the universal translator fixes it for whomever's
Right.
listening.
Right.
So yeah, that last part, that broadcasting part, is a mystery that isn't addressed in the 24th century. But what makes sense when we're watching it in Enterprise, because remember, Enterprise is the show that's set in the 22nd century. So
Right.
the broadcasting aspect of it is Hoshi. Hoshi is our broadcaster. She is receiving it, she interprets it, and then she tells the crew, or tells the captain, whomever it is, what is being said.
Right.
And then she also makes it, and also oftentimes whenever the aliens in Enterprise are speaking, they're speaking on the view screen. So again, the view screen is picking up the broadcast from the other ship, interpreting what is being said, and allowing everybody on the bridge to hear the broadcast in their native language. So
Right.
so
So
that's, yeah.
in the Star Trek movies, the J.J. Abrams ones, Uhura is also a translator. Is that true of her character in the original series? She's
Yes, yes, it
a
is.
language expert as well.
She is also a linguist. She is a top-notch linguist, and there's so the way they kind of make it in Trek so far, that I can understand it, there are anybody can be trained in communications. Anybody can be a lingual whatever, but there are certain people who have an innate knack for being able to pick up and interpret languages better than anyone else. And
Right.
Uhura is one of those people. So is Hoshi. Uhura is another one. There's just certain ones who are just like, there's just something about language, they can do it. And they've kind of expanded upon that a bit for Uhura in Strange New Worlds,
Uh
because she's Cadet Uhura in Strange New Worlds. And there's a scene where they ask her how many languages she can speak, and like I think they guess at one time, it's like the captain says that she can speak something like 15 or 17 languages or whatever, and she's like, actually I speak 37, and everybody just kind of like stares at her. And I mean, even I was like, I didn't even know there were 37 languages. Like, what languages did you pick up? Like, where did you,
yeah.
and they kind of give an explanation for where she went to get so many different languages. But yeah, it's just like that's her thing. Um, there was something else I was going to say about the universal translator. Um,
Well, while you're thinking about it, I just want to
yeah,
mention I have a
yeah,
friend. He is a linguist, and he's one of those people who, yeah, he gets languages. He loves it. He briefly was on a team that was sent to a nation to help translate the Bible. Unfortunately, he got sick, and so he had to come back. But he taught himself Japanese just by watching anime and stuff like that. Loves languages. When he talks, like if you're reading something and it's from a culture with a certain, like when we read the Bible or we read C.S. Lewis stuff, he'll read it with like a British accent. Like he'll try and give it the authentic accent, which is just hilarious because it basically meant every time we would get together and talk about C.S. Lewis, read the C.S. Lewis stuff. Like he was always the guy we'd go to for reading. All right, time to read the passage that we're going to talk about, and so you go for it. Um, so yeah, those people actually exist, and he's
Yeah,
a great
I
guy.
know. Yeah, I know they do. I've seen some of them work. I can remember taking different language courses, and it always seemed like there was always one person in my class who just, man, they didn't just
Absorbed it.
speak it, but they were just, yeah. If you didn't know any better, you would think that was the language they spoke. Me, on the other hand, I have absolutely no luck, no ear for languages whatsoever. I have tried, and I mean, I have
Yeah.
really tried, and it doesn't take for me. And I
No,
mean,
me either.
I don't want to I don't want to say that like I just kind of am unwilling or whatever, because everybody's always like, oh, anybody can learn a language. I just don't think that I can. I've tried. I have a deep respect for those people who can get it, but I
Right.
mean, I took Spanish, I took French, I even took
Yes.
German and
Same
Russian
here.
at one point, and
Yeah. That's
none of
also
them
true for
worked.
me. When I was in elementary school, I was at a private school, and we had to start learning Spanish. And I think third through fifth grade, and then in fifth grade, they tried teaching us Latin. Didn't take. I got to high school, started trying taking French. Did a year of French, didn't like it. Switched to German for a girl, of course, being an idiot that I am. I took the 2 years of German, and nothing. So I get it.
Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, like the German and Russian ones for me were definitely my choice, and I
Mm,
don't remember what I was thinking, what I was going through in life, where I thought, "Oh, you've had absolutely zero success with language. It's not your fault. It's the language's fault. So go pick another one." And it just Russian was a nightmare for me. I like it. Just that
yeah,
one, I
Russian.
I couldn't even begin to like I couldn't say anything. Like, I can barely remember how to say anything in French or Spanish. But yeah, they
Right.
just Russian was a nightmare.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I so those people who can do it, who can already speak like 7, 10 languages, whatever.
Right.
Man, you're doing something amazing, and I hope that you have a job or something that uses that talent, that skill, whatever. But it's definitely definitely not me.
Right.
Um, but yeah, back on the subject of the universal translator. I mean, that's what I was going to say in Discovery, in the show Discovery in the second season. There is a an episode where the ship basically kind of goes haywire, and it starts making everybody speak in different languages. But not only do they speak in different languages, but it's cycling them through languages. So at one point, like the captain speaks French, and then at another point, and like the captain speaks French, and our main character Michael Burnham, they were talking together. She started speaking Spanish, but then like in the very next scene, she was now speaking Chinese, and someone on the bridge was speaking Arabic, I think. And then like not only that, but then like the consoles were now displaying information in different languages. Like one was displaying in Klingon, another one was like Latin, and so like it was all about how the universal translator was malfunctioning, and so it was presenting a bunch of information in the different languages. And I didn't think about it at the time, but in thinking about it now, like I understand that it was a malfunction, but still that meant that somewhere in the settings for the universal translator, it was recognizing whomever was working on a particular station or whatever, and would show the information in their language. There was no kind of like standardized language set. And it eventually took them having to call up the first officer who was sick at the time to, come up and help them because they couldn't get a handle on anything. Nothing was working because one minute it would be in
Right.
Portuguese and next minute it would be in, Tau Ceti, whatever the hell. So they needed somebody who could speak multiple languages, fix it. And the first officer on Discovery spoke 94 languages, so of course he could.
94. Wow.
94, right.
Don't go overboard with those or anything.
Yeah, well, it helps he's an alien, so that was the other part of it too. He was probably side note on that. That first officer is probably one of the more unique characters that they've come up with in Trek,
Hmm.
bar none. So, but yeah, he spoke 94 languages, so he was able to help them fix the universal translator and at least temporarily get it working on the bridge so they could go elsewhere and fix it for the rest of the ship. But it was a very interesting scene to watch as they were all trying to work together, but no one spoke the same language at the same time. And then it kept shifting around. So, yeah, there's still some magic there with the UT that hasn't been totally fleshed out and explained. And who knows? Maybe we'll eventually get there one day where somebody finally explains how it works. Because they've done enough between all the shows to give us big chunks of what it takes to kind of have this thing. But that last little, those finer details that show the linkages, that hasn't been done yet.
Okay.
So,
I'm curious because when you were initially saying that the universal translator was like making people talk in Spanish and then like Chinese, I was like, man, what? But then it makes more sense if like if I'm hearing you, Perry, talk to me, it's not that the machine was making you talk in Chinese, it's making me hear you talk in Chinese as if I
yes,
understood
yes,
Chinese, but I don't.
yes.
So it's communicating the wrong language from you to me,
Yes.
not
That was
not you
the that
saying
was
it. Yeah.
yes, that was the breakdown the way that it was in the Discovery episode. 1 minute everybody seemed to be speaking English, and then when they first started noticing the breakdown, it was between the captain and the first officer. And again, he just kind of like she says something to him, but it's in Spanish, and he turns to her to question her, but what he says comes out in French. And so then they like are staring at each other, and then they walk out onto the bridge, and it's absolute chaos because everybody is speaking a different language, and the screens are popping up showing different languages. One's in Klingon, one's got some Arabic language floating across it, another one's got something else entirely that some alien whatever. Like
You
there
know,
was just all of that going on.
I like the idea that the writing would also be different. Like I think
Yeah.
of Worf on Next Generation, on the Enterprise, and Picard says, "What does it say?" Like what's the reading? And Worf is reading it, and he says, "I have two torpedoes ready for blah, blah." He says something, and it makes sense that yeah, Worf is reading. Maybe it's Klingon. I mean, he grew up on Earth, so maybe it's English, whatever. But like yeah, they're reading in their own language, and only when
Yeah.
they get together to communicate are they able to communicate across.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fascinating idea, actually.
It actually makes perfect sense because if you think about it, I mean, we already have language barriers now. And if we had a device that didn't make it necessary for people to have to learn other languages, but could instead just be natural and comfortable speaking your native tongue, and then the device would pick that up and broadcast to whomever you were speaking to in their native language in real
Right.
time, then I think it would obviously smooth conversation. Now, I know there were some companies a few years ago who were working on it. I don't know how far into um, development of the product they are or they came. There was a company, I believe it was called Simons, that had developed something akin to a. They were calling it a universal translator, but it was this large circular thing I remember seeing the promo for it, and it was huge and like sat up on your chest, and it was like right here, but it was like basically like a speaker. And so
Right.
as you spoke, you would broadcast the language, but you had to set the thing
To
to
the right
whatever
language.
language it was. So like
Right.
if you were in Spain or wherever it was, you could set it to wherever you were, and it
Right.
would broadcast just in that language. So then if you
Well,
went
I
somewhere else, you
I
had to
know I've
change it.
certainly used Google Translate at work a couple times. Usually, people who speak Spanish who don't speak English who have come in and they already know they can pull up Google Translate, and it. I mean, we weren't using the voice to text or like the text to voice part. We were using voice to text to communicate, but it wasn't like reading out what you were saying necessarily. But yeah, that technology is definitely realistic. I mean, we have
Yeah.
proto versions of it as we speak. So
And
it's kind of
they're
fascinating.
certainly not, yeah, they're certainly not perfect, but we're getting there. And I mean, I think it's a very interesting thing that we are, in the path to develop. I think that one day we will get there, or we'll have something that can just do that for us. But
Yeah. It
yeah,
makes
I
me
think we're getting
wonder
there.
about like when Keiko O'Brien was trying to talk to Kai Wynn, or I guess she was just Vedic Wynn at the time, about the scientific nature of the wormhole, which they called, the temple of the prophets. You know, are is the system having to invent words on the fly basically at times? I mean, I imagine it has to whenever you say a word that's not in that language yet. You're introducing a new concept, a new phrase, a new word. It has to basically invent that word for that language to communicate it. That's
Well,
actually kind of an interesting idea if that would
well,
ever happen.
I think part of that shows in the breakdown, like for example, in the episode Starship Down, where Kira is fasting. And we're seeing her and Jadzia are sitting on the bridge,
Oh, you're
and
right. Yeah.
Jadzia asks her if she wants some food, and she says no, that it's Hamara. So it
Right.
doesn't translate to whatever that would be. We just hear it as
Maybe it's
Hamara, the
maybe that's
Bajoran word.
literally the Bajoran word
Right.
for it. Yeah.
And then when Kira is praying for Cisco when he gets hurt, we don't hear her prayer in English. We hear the Bajoran prayer.
Right.
So, I mean, if this was, to make a more contemporary thing, like if we were listening to somebody who was praying in, say, you know, Arabic, for example,
Right.
if you spoke Arabic, you would understand what they were saying in that prayer,
Right.
and we could get a translation of that prayer. If you don't understand it, somebody can translate it for you. But in
Right.
this case, again, the universal translator, failed, and so we were hearing the prayer in its natural language. So I
Right.
think there are, even for as advanced as we see them in Deep Space Nine, there are still language breakdowns on some things, and that's what we're getting in those
Right.
situations.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating subject.
Yeah, really is. It actually totally distracts from this terrible episode. So now do want to point out a couple of things really quick, just for the sake of history here. Um, the General Denning is played by Charles Napier, who is a long credited sci-fi actor, and he also had a little bit of Trek history to him as well, because he appeared in the 1960s Star Trek the original series as a character named Adam in an episode titled "The Way to Eden," which is a very interesting episode in which the Enterprise encounters, for all intents and purposes, space hippies. Um, they really are. They're a group of young people who are traveling, looking for this planet that they've, called Eden, in which once you're there, all of your suffering ends. Whatever diseases you have, whatever your issues are, all of it just goes away. And they're fleeing from the so-called utopia that Earth and other cultures and other planets like Earth claim that they have, and they're searching for true freedom. And part of the Enterprise's objection to this is their influence tends to take people out of living their normal life, what we see as a normal life. Many of the crew kind of stop paying attention to their duties, and they're kind of getting lost in this kind of carefree nature and not paying attention to very important things like ship operations, for example. And another part of it too is that the leader of this group, it turns out that he's a deceiver. He's not really doing this to look for any kind of true freedom or whatever. It turns out he's got some kind of rare disease, which he is not. He's a carrier for, but not afflicted by. He's always
Okay.
patient zero. So he has to go to this planet in the hopes that he can be cured or whatever of it. But he's dragging along all of these people with him, and there's
Mm,
concern that they're obviously going to die because of them being around patient zero
yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And yeah, Charles Napier,
Okay.
again, he plays a young guy named Adam, who is dressed in the weirdest outfit I have ever seen in my life, and plays this weird cross between like a lyre and a guitar, and it's it's a trippy scene even for the '60s.
Right.
Um, but a little backstory about him, of course, is that he thoroughly disliked being Adam in that episode, And
Right.
when they came back to doing this episode, Little Green Men, and they asked him to be in the episode, he agreed, but with the caveat that he not play a space hippie and not have to dress in any kind of.
Oh, he played the exact opposite character in this instance.
Yes. Yes, he didn't wanna be dressed in any kind of strange alien garb whatsoever, so he was the perfect fit as the general here in
Yeah,
this episode.
cigar
So,
chomping general.
yes.
Yeah,
And so then, of course, we have to talk about, the Roswell incident, which was, July 8th, 1947, which is when this is supposed to have occurred, which, again, the story was the, crashed weather balloon. And you can look all this stuff up, of course, but the gist of that is basically that President Truman, was basically committing the U.S. to a massive offensive against communism, and they had launched a bunch of balloons to kind of like spy to pick up on where communists, wherever they may be hiding, right?
right.
And this caused a bit of a sensation with people seeing these strange objects in the sky, which led to the whole alien, stuff that went down. And in particular, when one crashed near Roswell, New Mexico, several years later, the story came out that it was not a weather balloon that actually crashed. It was a UFO, and these little green men were being sequestered at Area 51 and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of where all of this sprang out. And I just thought it was very interesting to not only talk about that, but also the interesting parallel of uh, using weather balloons for spy mastery stuff. And here we are, 2023, and we just
33.
had our own run in with spy balloons
Yeah,
from,
China.
I guess they were said they were coming from China. Yeah, a series of them. I mean, America shot down two, I think, and then I think Canada got one as well.
Well,
So,
there was there were people who were saying that maybe they just got trigger happy and just started shooting down anything they could because some of those other things they shot down, they were having trouble confirming what they shot. They were just like, we're not going to let any more spy balloons in. So anything that looks like a
right.
spy balloon gets shot out of the sky just for looking funny.
Anything anything floating that we didn't put up there,
Yeah.
it's coming down
And
real fast.
people were joking about poor little Timmy's balloon got got loose and got
Got annihilated.
F-35
Yeah.
chasing it down. Uh, yeah. So anyway,
But, I mean,
um,
I think that's just interesting that here we are some, 50 years later, 60 years later, however long it is, and
right.
we're kind of having a go at the same thing here. We're still dealing with spy
What goes
balloons,
around
and
comes around.
everything old is new again, right? That's
Yeah,
the that's the
that's
phrase,
the better say. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, no, and it was the same thing. At first, they said it was a weather balloon, but that was one of the things that came out too. No, that was no weather balloon. That was aliens. Then there was aliens. They're back.
Yeah.
So we've got better resolution cameras now than ever before in the history of humanity, and yet still couldn't determine, is it a weather balloon? Is it an alien? And we've had a series of crazy things cropping up over the last couple of years. Remember the strange silver obelisks that were appearing in deserts and just random places in, like, what was it? I think there's one that popped up in like Scotland or something. Do
I
you
think I
remember
remember
that?
hearing stuff like that, but I always thought that those were always proved to have been just someone
I don't know if
doing something. I mean,
I
I
mean,
don't know any
I just
details, but
yeah, I just assumed that it was. I remember when the first one appeared in the desert here in the United States, and just a big shiny piece of steel that was shaped like like a triangular obelisk that was just out there, and no one knew how it got there, and there didn't seem to be any obvious tracks leading up to it or anything like that, and it was just there, and then it was there for like a number of days, and then just as mysteriously as it appeared, it disappeared. And then, like, I think a week went by, and then another one popped up in like Scotland or Nova Scotia or something like that. And it was just there. And then same thing, it was there, and then it was there for like maybe 3 or 4 days, and then gone. And then another one popped up somewhere else. And I think they only did it like 3 times. And then after that, I haven't heard of any more of these things coming up. But as far as I know, no one has claimed responsibility for these strange things appearing.
Right.
Just there. So
Huh.
um,
A
I
quick
just
Google search brings up some articles that you could peruse, I
uh,
guess, on that. So I'll have to just
if you
peruse that for
want,
fun at some
yeah.
point.
I just think that all these strange things, it just proves that COVID broke some people. Some people's brains just they couldn't handle the
Well, that's actually a
stay
great
indoors
explanation for
order.
why no one saw them happen. Everyone was indoors, and so someone
It,
decided, I'm gonna break quarantine and have some fun.
right. No one will see me because no one's outside, and so yeah,
Yeah,
they just do the thing. But yeah, I just think that people just were intensely bored, and the first opportunity they had to go outside, they were like, "I'm gonna get real weird," and just started doing stuff.
yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, that's just par for the course. And I mean, like I said, we did this stuff in the '50s, and here we are still doing it 2023.
Right.
So um, but yeah, the Roswell incident is interesting in the fact that it was so closely tied to the communist scare, and what was born out of that was this hunger for otherworldly stuff, which led to a lot of sci-fi programming. So
Right.
yeah, there you go. The birth of sci-fi television is all because Harry Truman was like, I want to kill communists. So, which we also hear a indirect reference to Truman in the episode where General Denning calls him a what does he call him? A,
He's also a
a
Democrat.
piano? Yeah, he calls him a
Yeah,
piano playing Democrat.
but he's got one thing right. I don't trust that Martian anymore. He doesn't trust that Martian anymore than I do, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that piano playing Democrats finally got one thing right, which is the first time in Trek history that a sitting president or well, any president was
was
referred
mentioned.
to on the
Mm,
show in
nice.
any way, even obliquely. So this was the first time that they had done that.
Gotcha.
So
There's no
yeah,
Nixon head in a jar like on Futurama or somewhere.
no, no, no. Um, but Star Trek likes to do like a lot of weird name dropping where it'll tell you like two humans and an alien, and that always just used to crack me up. And they'd be like, "How do you want to do this? We've got three styles on record. You can do it like Mozart, you could do it like Beethoven, or you could do it like blah 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 from SETI 16 or whatever it was." Always, and would always laugh because they almost always, whenever they made their choice, they always picked the alien one. Always picked the alien one. So I just think it's a great way to get around having to give any credit to like artists living or dead. Right? We don't have
Right.
to worry about if we're not pitch perfect or not because we're doing it like this alien. Hmm,
Right.
there you go.
Right.
Well, I think we've pretty much nailed down this episode. Any redeeming qualities that you can see in this one that I may have
I guess
glossed
the only
over?
thing we would just be interested in saying is at the very end, Odo does arrest Quark. I don't know, is this the first time of being arrested in that capacity? I would imagine it's not, but it seems like Quark and Odo have always had a will or they won't they arrest, will he arrest him or not kind of relationship. So it seems like he's this is a new thing to be arresting Quark.
Mm,
Is that an
I would
accurate
say that
statement?
I would say he's arrested him several times, but it almost seems like he only arrests Quark when it's for things small enough that he'll get out of jail for in a couple of weeks.
Right.
Like it's not. He
It's
never
more just
truly seems to arrest him for anything serious, and when it does seem like it's serious, typically it ends up revealing something far more dangerous. And so it's like, was Quark truly guilty or was he kind of helping out here
right. Well,
and
that episode where
give
Worf
him a
learned that
pass?
Odo, as security officer, knows what he's doing. That was the insinuation is that Quark, whether he knew it or not, was helping Odo with his
Yeah,
investigation.
it's almost
So
like Quark knows when, like, no matter what crime it is he's committed, he understands that there are certain ones that are slap on the wrist crimes versus ones that are this is serious jail time. And on the ones that
right,
are serious jail time, he tends to cooperate with Odo. Other
right,
things he tries to scheme his way through, like
right,
unloading chemosite, for example. It's dangerous, or it's illegal, but it's also very dangerous. So it's just like, you're mitigating some of this here, and then like you said, a lot of the evidence burned up, so there was
Yeah.
nothing really to show for what they were doing.
Yeah.
Also, shout out to the story about cousin
That's actually
Gayla, because we've heard the mention of cousin Gayla a few times, and now here he is trying to kill Quark. So I'm ready to meet cousin Gayla whenever this finally happens.
Oh, are you hinting towards some future episode there, are you?
No, I just think that he's
It'd be
got to
nice
be
to
a
meet
very
him.
interesting, yeah, if
Hmm.
he can not only afford his own moon, which we know he has, but also afford this ship and also try to sabotage it. Um, he'd be an interesting Ferengi to see. So who knows?
Gotcha.
But yeah. But what did you? I think you already said. Like, what did you think of this episode? You liked it. You thought it was fun, right?
I my opinion of it is that it's fun to see all three of our main Ferengi together for extended period of time, but unfortunately the episode doesn't do enough with the premise to really knock it out of the park.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
this episode could have been a lot more, and as you pointed out, the overemphasis on the nurse professor couple takes away from our characters, and in fact gets overly indulgent with them.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can't hate this episode nearly as much as I hate Move Along Home, though. I'm gonna
Oh,
make that very
I don't
clear.
know. Well, I mean, I have found redeeming things about Move Along Home, as I've said, but in this episode, it just grated on my nerves a lot for
Yeah.
the the contrived tropes and the hokiness that was brought back up, and then just really just beat to death here. I just couldn't stand it. So
Right.
I was glad for this to be over and done with,
Right.
basically. Um,
Right.
but yeah, okay then. So I still think that once you've watched this one, you don't really have to go back to it. It's interesting though that the creators, the writers, and executive producers of the episode, they all love this episode. It's actually been on a list of episodes not to skip. Armin Shimmerman, who plays Quark, he has shouted this episode out as one of his
Okay.
favorites. That he loved the interplay of the story, and then again, other people liked it for the fun, the comedic aspects of the episode itself, but not me. I'm going to be the dissenting opinion here. I just think this episode was unnecessary. So
Gotcha. I
yeah.
mean, my opinion is that the plot of this episode should have been worked through again. The
Yeah.
initiating premise is fine. Again, I've had critiques of time jumping before, so I'll
Hmm.
let that pass. But um, yeah, this episode could have deserved, I think, a little bit better storytelling. If their attempt in this episode was to do an homage to past 1940s 50s storytelling, um, let me put it this way: it wasn't so obvious to me that that's what they were doing for me to catch on to it in a direct
Okay.
way, and so it basically falls flat in that sense because unless they were to overtly say we're doing an homage, it just comes off as an episode that missed its target. But that was basically if that's their point. Like I missed their intention, and therefore it comes off to me as if they missed their mark. But that's not the mark I expected. It's not what they were shooting at. So anyway, but yeah, I guess no
Okay.
beefs.
I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't like this one. David has found his, I guess, things to like about it. What are anybody has any other thoughts about this episode? I'd be interested to hear them. Let us know. We've told you several different ways you can reach us because we're on all the social medias, of course. You can also find us anywhere that you listen to podcasts as the Fire Capes, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I happen to do it on Spotify. Next week, we will be back. We will have um, some new stuff. We'll have a Trek After Dark as well that you can listen to and enjoy and critique, of course, and let us know about. But yeah, until next time, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.